All right, all right, all right, all right, all right, all right. Let me watch this.
I mean, the thing about the Vim question specifically is it comes across as like there's a different thing. It's one thing to ask, hey, why is he doing these things that he's doing? It's another thing to ask, why doesn't he use my favorite editor?
Number one most hated way of everybody who does tech is the person that says, why don't you use X? It is the most annoying form of questions that you could possibly receive. Let's go, Jay Blow. Based take, based amazing take. Because no matter what you use, there is 100% some other person's opinion in which is just like, well, hey, why don't you use Y instead of X? It's just so just throat punchy. I can't even explain it to you. So this is such a great take. I know he's making it only 2 editors, which is a little bit, it's very narrow, but you can extend this argument to everything. Oh, you're using Go? Why not Rust? There's no question about why not. Why not is almost exclusively the wrong way to phrase that. It should be, why would you do it for this situation? And the reason why you do that is then it gives you the chance to explain why was the technology choice made for this as opposed to why it wasn't for something else, because that can be for everything. That's an infinite explaining platform forever. Whereas when you say why would you, it's a single explanation platform, right? It's absolutely beautiful. Why not come? All right, here, hold on.
That I just learned 6 weeks ago and I'm a super fan of now, which I'm not saying that's exactly what you're doing, but it sounds like that.
Based.
Right? And it's like, that happens so much on the internet that everyone's just tired of it.
Yeah.
Is the thing to realize. It's like, dude, I've literally been programming for 40 years. You're going to come along and ask me why I don't use something invented 4 years ago that's like not better than anything else.
I mean, to be completely fair, Vim is rather old. I mean, it was like what, 1991 or 1994, and it's based off Stevie, which is in the 80s, which is based off of Vi, which is in 76. So it is technically older than 40 years old, but we're arguing the wrong point here. I'm on your team. I'm on your team.
It's like, who cares? Literally, who cares?
Vi is older than Emacs.
And like one of the problems, right? This is a thing to realize. One of the problems with programming right now is because everybody's so new to the field because it's grown so fast. Most people don't understand where the forward direction is in terms of making progress.
Also, something to really look at is that Jay Blow, he develops on Windows, which I think is also going to just be a fundamentally different experience than if you develop on Linux. Like if you get someone coming from Linux, they're probably going to be less likely to be using VS Code or VS standard VS, not VS Code. Forgive my misspeech there, right? Like the chance of someone using Visual Studios is astronomically tiny on Linux. I don't even know if there is a Visual Studio on Linux, right? And so his choice of Emacs probably just shows his age within programming, and VS Code or Visual Studio is probably just showing the platform that he enjoys, right?
Right. There's all these things, and I've said this before, common returners to the stream will know what I'm saying here. There's a difference between things that are new in a fashion kind of way, where they're new but just different and basically the same as what we've always had, or worse, and then things that actually represent forward progress in terms of what we're able to achieve or how well we are able to achieve it with software. And the almost no new thing these days falls in the latter category. Almost every...
That's an interesting way to kind of phrase the problem. Yeah, because in some sense, he's very, very right. He's actually very, very right. Because right now, if you think about Emacs, Emacs has effectively a fully customized editor. In fact, it's more customizable than Vim. There's some things in Vim that you can't change, right? Like I can't take this and put it up here or remove this altogether. There's things about Vim that are not fully customizable yet. And so therefore, Emacs truly is more customizable than Vim is. The only difference is that Vim has a different set of motions, and technically Emacs Evil Mode doesn't quite fulfill the Vim modal exact. There's like some slight things about it that are always super annoying that I don't like about it, but that's like very, very minor. I could get used to it. But neovim simply provides Lua, where Emacs provides Lisp. Emacs is more moldable than Vim is. Emacs has a LSP clients. Neovim has LSP clients. Emacs has Tree Sitter. Neovim has Tree Sitter. Is there any like real revolution? No. Is it different? Yeah, that's about it, right? Maybe I was always destined to be a Roblox kid. I just am too old, and I've been recaptured back in to being a Roblox kid. Right? Maybe that's all that it really was for at the end of the day. And then Emacs also has a lot of really great stuff. Everyone talks so much about Magit and org mode. And it seems like it's pretty exciting. The thing that Vim does have that Emacs does not have is just raw dogging speed, right? The speed is just better. It just feels more crisp and smooth. Obviously, if you use very few plugins like how Jay Blow does, like he doesn't even use an LSP, then you probably wouldn't be able to tell much of a difference betwixt Vim and Emacs at that point. So
every new thing falls into the former category.
So I do agree with him. Like neovim is a former category innovation. It already exists with Emacs. It's just a different spin with less features meeting together, right? So he is 100% right on that take.
Where it's just new, more complicated crap that doesn't work very well and just adds complexity to your life. And as a field, we do not appear to have the discipline to discern between those two things and to minimize the fashion junk, right? And
so this is where I actually do disagree with him. I think Lisp is less approachable than Vim or than Lua. I think Lua is one of the easiest languages ever, and the neovim API is exceptionally simple. And I think it just makes it way, way easier for a person who is new to become proficient in customizing their editor in the way they want. I just don't think Lisp is ever going to be as easy because very few people start on a Lispy language. Almost everybody has some form of C-flavored syntax. When you start off, it's much easier to kind of get up to speed on something like Lua than it is something like Lisp. And anyone that disagrees with that, being like, oh, that's a very subjective take, like, I hate to break this to you, most of the world isn't functional. Almost none of the world is functional. Now, you could argue that the functional programming language paradigm is in fact actually better, and that there does exist a world in which if everybody was functional, it would actually be easier to start in a functional world kind of programming paradigm. But that's just not how it's ever worked. And I'm not actually convinced that that is technically true. I think for someone who is unexperienced in anything, thinking of the world as a for loop is extremely human, right? Thinking things as recursive is not very human. Like, you don't think, oh, I have a list of 10 things I need to do. I'm going to keep following the list until there's no more of them, right? Like, that's not a human thought. A human thought is like, I'm going to follow step 1, then I'm going to go to step 2, then I'm going to go to step 3. And so I just think it makes more sense why C languages are just more popular, even though Lisp is like, one of the oldest high-level languages ever created? Like, theoretically, it should have been more popular. I'm very confused why it actually isn't. It's from the 50s. Yeah, MacArthur, right? I'm actually shocked that Lisp isn't more popular than it is. And maybe it is. Functional actually is better. I actually don't know. I've done functional a few times, and I have to really set my brain to do it correct. It's difficult. Well, that's kind of crazy, to be honest. Yeah, it's very old. Lisp isn't just functional, though. Yeah, I know it's not just functional. I mean, not every language can be Haskell. I get it. OCaml's not just functional. It also has some procedural nature to it. Right.
And so we just keep making life worse and worse for ourselves. So when you ask me, like, why don't you use neovim or whatever, the question you're really asking me is, why aren't you participating in this decades-long process of making life worse and worse for ourselves? And I think when phrased that way, you can see why.
I do think he's mischaracterizing the argument. Like, I like to work in the terminal and the terminal only. I used Vim to begin with, which, by the way, Vim is like decades upon decades long old. I like something that's snappy and fast. Emacs does feel a little bit slow when I get all the little things into it. I don't know why it feels that way, but every time I've ever used Emacs, it's always felt a little bit slower, especially on larger projects. Vim has always felt snappy. And so I've always just enjoyed the working out of a terminal experience, whereas Emacs really feels like you're supposed to work out of the GUI, not out of the terminal. And it kind of inverts the process. I'm very POSIX-y, and I know that JBlow does not like the POSIX, whatever you call that, the POSIX manifesto, right? He does not like that. And so this all makes perfect sense. I think these are just two different, like, views of the world. Yeah, I know Emacs does work in the terminal. I understand that Emacs works in the terminal. That's actually the way I used it, was Emacs in the terminal. I used Emacs in the terminal for, a year and a half, a year long. I tried DoomMax, SpaceMax, tried to customize my own. I've kind of played around with it for a while. I don't think this is a decades-long in-shitification. I think neovim generally is a de-shitification of the experience. And the reasons why I say that is because a huge thing is the reason why I think Vim actually became an in-shitification of the experience is because Vim stopped. It created its own language. I think whenever you create your own language for an editor, you create your own DSL, I think that generally is a bad plan. NeoVim came along and made Lua work. Lua is a well-supported, well-documented, well-tested language that has been around forever, right? And I think that makes the world a lot better. Instead of using something that is just bespoke to this one editor, you use something that can be used anywhere. Like, because I know how to program my NeoVim, I can jump into Roblox code and actually start understanding it right away. I can also look at other embedded systems and game development that runs a UI off of it. I can just immediately start understanding what's happening. So there's like a real benefit to having common languages. And Lua is just great for UIs. I think procedural mutational type UIs are pretty easy to kind of just get up and running, though they become disasters after a while. Let's see. I know. Let's use the entire Chrome runtime to use HTML, CSS, and JS to build code editor. Yeah, it integrates with your system. Yeah, that would be VS Code. And I'm not even dunking on VS Code. I think VS Code is just the simplification of IDEs, because IDEs are very daunting. When you first use something like IntelliJ and it starts up and it loads and it takes a long time and all these kind of things, it feels kind of daunting. Though I think VS Code it just feels easier to the new person, because you like open up something and it's like, hey, download this thing for autocomplete. And you're like, okay. And then autocomplete happens, right? It feels easier.
Now, you may not agree with that framing, but that is my framing.
Yeah, I don't agree with the framing, but
of the question.
Actually,
I mean, you're even saying Vim. You're saying Vim. Do you realize Vim is a new thing, and the editor was originally called VI without the M, right? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, Vim is just improved motions and some other good stuff. I mean, it's kind of that is not a good argument, because Emacs was able to continually be improved and modernized, whereas Vi with Bill Joy stopped being worked on because Bill Joy went to Emacs. Right, like that's a fairly pedantic, fairly narrow take right there. That's not real, right? If someone improves it and forks it and say, hey, we're going to just keep on working on it, that doesn't make it invalid because it's not the original project.
Like when people say Vim, I just know where they're coming from right away. In terms of, when they started. That is the standard editor. Later. That is also true. Why aren't people asking me why I don't use the standard editor? I don't.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, his argument, he should be using Ed, right? Because that's even older. It's even more original. But I think we can all agree that just because it's been around a long time doesn't necessarily make it good. Like, TCP is going out of fashion because TCP, though written in 1974, is in fact not as good as UDP. And the reason why it's not as good as UDP is because UDP works really well on a robust network, and our networks at one point were not robust. And so TCP was actually better than UDP. But then as our network became super robust and able to actually handle these things and is almost always reliable, UDP became much better than TCP. So it's kind of like this very interesting kind of change up in the world.
Oh, no. I did actually try and use Pico a little bit, probably in 1990, and I was like, yeah, I'm not into this.
Yeah, why would you use Pico?
Oh, God.
I don't know. I don't understand those editors.
Don't. Why do I try to talk to Twitch chat? I don't even know.
Good call. Good call. You tell him. You tell him. I think Jay Blow's argument there is 99% on the money, which is that we constantly see, like, they just take React, for example. How many different versions and flavors of React has happened? A whole bunch. Are we actually in a much better spot than we were just 2 versions of React ago? Maybe, maybe not. Like, everything keeps on having new versions of it. And are we actually making a dramatic improvement in life, or are we not? I would say that there's probably some decent benefit to functional components over class components in some sense, but I think there's also some really nice things about class components that functional components don't have. And so I kind of think you kind of get into this idea where it's just like, are things being improved, or are they simply being changed for the sake that one type of programming is no longer in, goodness as a new type of programming? So I always tend to like Jonathan Blow's takes. I just find that they're sometimes limited, and they fold back in on themselves, which is, it just shows when you're, like, you could just take his argument and say, well, then if you use that argument precisely, then Ed is by far the better editor. But that's not a good argument. The argument is, are you advancing and creating something better? Is neovim a proper adaptation to the times that are modern? Just like Emacs is. It's arguably almost as complete as Emacs. Yeah, I would say that it's just adapting to the modern world, an old piece of technology, just like Emacs has been adapted to the modern world as an old piece of technology. So, love his take, absolutely on it. I'm just not so sure about the last thing. So no, this is TC Matthews. This just does not exist anymore. I know you're saying write things that TCP are good at and write UDP for things that are good at. That's not the case. UDP is no longer what it used to be. See, at one point in the world, and this is actually still true in parts of the world, right? Like in India, the network is known as dropping a lot of packets. So UDP can potentially. Maybe UDP actually causes more harm than good. I don't know. I'd have to measure it. My gut feeling is that it actually is good. It's actually much, much better. But at one point, when you sent a packet across the internet, the percent chance of you making it across is worse than Russian roulette. So TCP was just needed. You needed a reliable form of communication that could happen. With UDP just makes the assumption that reliability is built into the algorithm, not into the protocol. And this allows you to send a lot of data quickly, and then on the few things that are incorrect, you correct with the underlying algorithm on top of the protocol as opposed to the protocol itself, which allows much more throughput and much less traffic. TCP has a lot more traffic because the basic idea of TCP is that this person, after the little handshake, hey, I'm handshaked, this person on the way back sends what message frame they're going to accept. Okay, I am okay. I'm at 100. So, okay. So then I'm going to send 101, and I will respond back with 101, right? I think that's how it goes. And then this thing goes, okay, 102. And then this guy responds back with 102. And there's something called the sliding window, which means that it actually doesn't wait for each individual packet, but instead it will send like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then it cannot move this window forward until 1 has been consumed. When 1 has been consumed, it can send off 11. When 2 has been consumed, it can send off 12. Like TCP requires communication back, whereas UDP does not require that. So it is a lot nicer to be able to do stuff with UDP. You can actually go a lot faster. Where losing data is acceptable. That's not even true. You must understand that you are likely watching a stream that is being sent by UDP. And that is why a lot of these things, that is why they built in something like NACS, negative acknowledgement, saying, hey, you need to resend a specific frame for me to understand. This is why they also have something called forward error correction, where they use things like, Reed-Solomon or XOR effectively to go and take that and, turn it into a more reliable format. This is literally how, within the next 5 years, what percentage of the internet will be purely UDP? That's because QUIC, or HTTP3, is just UDP with the algorithm underneath it being TCP, or a version of TCP that just is optimized for UDP. The reliability of global ISPs and the usage of UDP are correlated. Exactly. TCP was a different world, right? TCP was created for a world that no longer exists. Whereas UDP is created. I thought QUIC is over UDP. It is. The first version of QUIC, I think, was called literally, you can actually find it called TCP over UDP, right? So if you go TCP over UDP, right? Like this is just like a thing, right? And so this was kind of like the whole idea is that you use UDP as a transmission algorithm, but you do all this, right? Yeah, and so Quick, I don't exactly know the exactness of how Quick works. My guess is they work off of NACS potentially. I'd have to look at it. I'd have to understand it a bit more. And there's a lot of difficulty when it comes to TLS and all that kind of stuff. But anyways, nonetheless, there you go. And so it's kind of like it's the exact same thing. It's just like sometimes time moves on, right? And so what was good no longer is good. Just because Vi was created first doesn't make Vi more superior because the time just has simply moved on. And so therefore, you cannot say TCP is superior to UDP in this day and age. Though 50 years ago, you could have made the very real case that the internet needs to run off TCP over UDP because of the time period in which that was in. Anyways, okay, we're getting too deep. The name is the prime engine. I need to go back to refactoring.